Romans 13, God's servant authorities. Reason 3 of 10 why Romans 13 is biblical government. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. The God-ordained authorities are identified as servants of God. The civil rulers in Romans 13 are identified 3 times as servants of God, 2 times in verse 4 and once in verse 6. The Greek word identifying God's civil servants is diakonos. The same Greek word is used to identify God's church servants, called deacons. A consistent translation could read for God's civil servants as God's civil deacons. Now, in a church, all deacons are God's servants, just like in civil government, they are God's servants. However, in a church, if a deacon servant was being unrighteous and leading contrary to the Bible, no Christian would claim they are God's legitimate church deacons or church servants. Now, in a state, all authorities are God's servants, just like in a church. However, in a state, if an authority was being unrighteous and leading contrary to the Bible, ignorantly taught Christians claim they are still God's legitimate deacon servants. They claim this using the very text in Romans 13 that actually rebuts such a claim. It's this very text that defines God's authorities being only good and just. Romans 13, 3 and 4 say, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil." Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. For it is a servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a servant of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. End quote. God appointed Saul to be the civil ruler over Israel in 1 Samuel 10:1. But when Saul rebelled and rejected using and applying the word of God, God rejected Saul as being his king. 1 Samuel 15:23 says, "For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and insubordination is as reprehensible as false religion and idolatry. Since you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king." End quote. But based on many pastors' misinterpretations of Romans 13 today, they would say you should still honor Saul as your king, though God said otherwise. What biblical folly has caused so much of the Christian world today to freely abdicate God's rule to Satan and the unrighteous? Satan and the unrighteous have no right to any civil authority. God only allows the unrighteous to come to power when the people of God turn away from him to discipline or punish them. There are many biblical examples of this and not one biblical exception, including and up to the final destruction of Israel in 70 AD because of their rebellion. God lets everyone, including his people, even today, reap what they sow. To the flesh, destruction; to the spirit, life. Galatians 6, 7, and 8. That's why God said in Proverbs 16:4, quote, "The Lord has made everything for its own purpose, even the wicked for the day of evil." End quote. Just because a nation state may identify certain individuals as, quote, "civil authorities," end quote, that does not make them God's civil authorities, any more than Hitler was God's civil authority when he became Chancellor of Germany. God says in Hosea 8:4, quote, "The people have appointed kings without my consent and princes without my approval. They have brought about their own destruction." End quote. God identifies exactly what his civil authorities are to be like. Be careful to not let, quote, "Satan, the god of this world," end quote, deceive you in falsely identifying his civil agents. That was the destruction of the German Christians and is the demise for Christians in many nations today. God makes it clear what his legitimate righteous rulers will be like, and none of them will be wicked, according to Romans 13, 3 and 4. and I quote, "For rulers not our cause. They're not a cause for fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you'll have praise from the same. For it is the servant of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is an avenger of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil."